All right, I've got 6:30 on my clock.
I do too.
Wonderful. Go ahead and call to order the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for January 6th. If we could get a roll call, please.
Ahern, Bathke, Janeezer, Mickelson,
Here.
Schmerbach,
Here.
Willer,
Here.
Yadi.
Here. The second half of the alphabet present tonight. Up next will be approval of the agenda. I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll move to approve the agenda.
Wonderful. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Great. Motion carries. Up next, any public comment on topics not on the agenda? Okay. We'll move on to item number 4, future land use map amendment and preliminary site plan. We'll start with a staff presentation.
Okay. Thank you. This property is located on Jordan Street. The addresses are between 1500 and 1600. You can see it on the map there. It's just north of Sarah Court, which would be just east of Ranchaw Way. This is a 2 requests here, a future land use map amendment from urban medium intensity to urban high intensity, and a preliminary site plan, and it's 2.59 acres. Currently, the zoning is C2, our highway commercial district. Comprehensive plan, as I mentioned, is urban medium intensity, and that request to urban high intensity is just due to the residential density that we're seeing. Here's a partial description of both urban medium intensity and urban high intensity. And in the urban medium intensity, and please note that the comprehensive plan is just a general guide for us. General aggregate development density of 7 to 14 units per acre. The UHI is where you generally see above 14 units to the acre, 14 or above. And I will note in its descriptions there, usually located along major arterial collector roads. Jordan is not a collector or arterial, however, it's very close to both Forever Green and Ranchaw Way, which are both arterial roads. I do think it meets the last criteria. I'll go back into that a little bit more, where it says edges of UHI development transition to lower intensity and buffer those higher intensity uses through design, landscaping, and buffering, and I think that development does that very well. And I was part of the creation of the comprehensive plan, which was adopted in 2023. I remember, designating this property on the east side of Jordan as UMI, that medium, really just to kind of give ourselves an opportunity if something was offered as a higher intensity or higher density development, just to give us an opportunity to look at that a little bit closer, which I think we're doing here, and just talk about it. We do have some medium density residential properties to the east, so I think it's good to kind of talk about this and see if the design is appropriate, how the building is situated on there, any buffering and things like that. So here's the site plan. It's a large building. It would be 96 multifamily units in a 4-story building and related infrastructure. That equates to 37.06 units to the acre, so we're above that 14 units to the acre. Notably, the building is kind of pushed up to Jordan Street, which is preferable, and then you have the drive and the parking behind there, which really increases the distance to the residential properties to the east. So in staff's mind, this is really kind of a preferable type design instead of putting all the parking in the front and pushing the building all the way to the back. As I mentioned, the property is going to be a 4-story building. This is what's permitted in the C2 district. So if the height is something that would be objectionable to you, you should note that that height is what's permitted already in C2, and you could already build that with any type of commercial development. So just keep that in mind if you would. Here's some renderings of the building, pretty much 100% masonry with the exception of the window glazing. Another rendering kind of just breaks up that facade a little bit. If you see the pond there, I think it'd be a nice view coming off Ranchaw Way. You have this kind of open area with the pond. you'll be able to see this building, which I think will be a nice, give a nice feeling to that corridor. We are working on Rancho Way Phase 6. We'll have a tunnel adjacent to this pond, and we're working on a trail that would come across Jordan Street and then ultimately make its way all the way over to the North Ridge Trail, the main trail we have going north-south. So a lot of things in the works up there, so we think this is a great location for increased density, residential density, and particularly all the other things going on, like the hospital, commercial. We got grocery stores very close by. Again, gives people the opportunity to walk, ride bikes, and things like that to those types of amenities. Here's another rendering kind of looking across that pond. And another rendering. I think it's very nice building. Again, with the 100% masonry, it's difficult to be critical. Looks very nice. We appreciate Nate and his team have been great to work with. And I mentioned the UHI, the land use amendment, and again, I mentioned the building would be pushed up to the street. That created, at its closest point, an 88-foot setback to the east property line. The buildings over on the east side on that development, they're about 35 feet. So we're a good 120 feet distance between buildings, which I think provides a pretty decent setback. The development contains an existing 15-foot wide landscape buffer along the east property line. We're appreciative that somebody in their infinite wisdom decided to plant that buffer when the development went in. So you've got a pretty decent landscape buffer that's already developed through there, and they're preserving that and actually adding more trees throughout there. So these are the things where I think through design, through buffering, those things I think make sense for a little bit more density in this location. And again, those are kind of the things I just talked about, that edge. We don't have any objections to this request. And we have two findings. Staff's opinion, it would achieve consistency with the future land use comprehensive plan for amendments, and the site plan would achieve consistency with approval standards. And we recommend you accept those two listed findings and forward both requests to the City Council with a recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have an applicant presentation?
Yeah, hi, my name's Nate Kading. I'm with Hodge Companies. I manage the real estate development efforts for our company, and I don't really have much to expand upon Russ's presentation. It's been good to work with Russ and the city, and we've went through several iterations of the site plan and the renderings, taking into account the various feedback we got from city staff and the fire department for fire truck turnarounds and everything. We're excited about the building and the opportunity. We think it's in a great location here, as Russ mentioned, with the new hospital and high daytime employment area, and think it's a great infill project. And the other thing to note is this was, I think, the first, if not one of the first, IEDA workforce housing grant applicants. We were awarded a $1 million grant from the state of Iowa back in May. So they identified this as a housing project that fit all of their criteria, and we were lucky enough to get that award as well. So we're excited to incorporate that into the project as well, and look forward to hopefully having approval and moving forward with construction here in early spring, midsummer of this year. So appreciate the consideration. Happy to answer any questions.
And Nate, would these be market rate?
Yeah,
units?
market
Okay.
rate. It's a mix of 1 beds and 2 beds. I think there's total, as Russ said, 96 units. I think 36 of them are 2-bedroom units, and the others are 1-bedroom units.
What is market rate?
We're seeing anywhere from 2 beds, kind of in that $1.70 to $1.85 a square foot, and the 1 beds now in the local area pushing almost $2 a square foot.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Great, thank you. Do we have any public comment? Okay, any questions or comments?
What's the parking ratio per unit? Does anybody know?
Generally, it's 1.5 parking spaces per unit.
Is it? Okay. I do like the way the building is articulated, so it's not just a long.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
well,
mean, you can break up the facade on a long linear building, but I think the articulation really helps in the elevation.
yeah, we'll talk a little bit with code amendments about, really it's massing is usually, I think, my biggest criticism to building, and the fact that the massing is broken up is what's helpful for a long building like this that's 4 stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was really impressed when looking through the renderings. Like, it's partly due to the shape of the lot that you have those curves in there, but it helps in like splitting it up into 4 sections. I think the 100% masonry, it's hard to make a large building not ugly, and especially within a budget, even more so. And I think this does a really good job of that. So,
And I would say the density, which is like, whoa, it's over 30 units to the acre. You have to remember that they have off-site detention. That's, normally projects will have their detention on site, which automatically kind of increases the lot area and decreases density. But since they had already planned it as a larger off-site pond, it's just the building and the related infrastructure on that lot.
So all the drainage will go to the existing pond?
Yep.
Underground, it looks like.
I'm sorry.
Underground, it
Yep.
looks like.
Yep.
There's
Yep.
the sheet.
And again, on the north side of that pond is where we have the trail and where we have a tunnel planned on Ranch Way Phase 6, right in that location to really get you over to the west side.
Yeah.
And then obviously that large lot there we kind of view as a great opportunity site in the city of North Liberty. So being able to get people ultimately from the trail kind of over to this area, which we consider a major economic center, is really important.
I'm kind of in with hoping to get people over there. Having the parking behind the building just promotes a feeling of safety when you're walking through there. So I like to see that too.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
There's only 3 of us here.
Yeah.
I'll move that the planning commission accept the listed findings and forward the future land use map amendment and preliminary site plan to the city council with a recommendation for approval.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Great. Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Ahern. I'm on the wrong part. Sorry. Yadi.
Aye.
Mickelson.
Aye.
Willer.
Aye.
Schmerbach.
Aye.
All right. Motion carries. Moving on to item number 5, future land use map amendment, zoning map amendment. We'll start with a staff presentation.
Okay, this one is one we saw, I think it was a couple of years ago. It was a large rezoning, but they're back to kind of change some things. So we do have some zonings in place. So this just kind of, I think the idea of the development pattern is really come to fruition, and so this zoning reflects ultimately what they want to do. So we have several requests in here. I don't think any of us want to read them all. So on the left, you could see the zoning map that shows the existing zoning. So we have a mix of RS6, RM8, and RM12. And then the frontage was zoned C2 also at that time. On the east side it's just urban low intensity. And the urban low intensity is up to, on the comp plan, like 6 units to the acre. So it's quite low. I remember at the time we left the urban low intensity because the overall density maintained that 6 units to the acre. So we just kind of left it as it is. There's just been some changes in the development pattern throughout that area. Obviously, the frontage was changed to that urban high intensity with the C2. The property to the southwest of this property is the assisted living facility, which also has a higher density. And so it made sense to me to bump up the density a little bit, particularly on that west side, and then have a little bit of flexibility moving interior, and then ultimately kind of hold the line of single-family residential as we moved east. So that property to the east, I think, is a good fit for some predominantly single-family development. And again, just some things we've talked about before. Here's the urban medium intensity, which is that 7 to 14 units to the acre, and urban high intensity, which is 14 plus. We did have a virtual Good Neighbor meeting on December 18th. We did have one person attend, and they provided an objection to the request. I'm not sure if it's really an objection to the zoning. It just seemed to be more related to the noise related to development in the backyard. They did talk about somebody beginning work at 6 a.m. So I responded and said, please give us a call. They shouldn't be working that early. You're exempt from noise standards between 7 and I think it's 9 o'clock at night, but certainly shouldn't be starting that early. Just a couple of things to point out. The map on the top left is our comprehensive plan, and it's a little difficult to see, but I circled it in red. Alexander Way is a corridor that's planned all the way from Forever Green Road, and it actually extends north of Penn Street. So it'll be a major collector street similar to Jones Boulevard. It's an important corridor, and it provides relief on some of our main corridors like Ranch Way in Kansas. They're really important corridors. Well, it has been kind of planned to go through the middle of this property. And I kind of, at the bottom left, provided a rendering which shows the location of where, at least to this point, we looked at where Alexander Way would intersect with Forever Green Road. Josiah looked very closely. We looked at spacing of where these intersections would be. We don't want to have a lot of intersections on Forever Green Road. We want to limit the location of intersections. So we looked at spacing between those other areas and felt that was the best location. Those commercial lots in the frontage wouldn't have direct access to Forever Green Road. It would just be accessed through this. So this is a pretty major intersection. And on the right is Coralville's land use plan. So you can actually see, the arrow pointing to where the subject property is. And for Alexander Way, whatever it's called, through Coralville, will actually extend and is planned to go all the way down to the Strip. So this is a pretty major roadway. And so you start to look at along this transportation corridor that's pretty major. In my mind, a higher density makes more sense. We do have a trail, an 8-foot wide trail plan on the west side of Alexander Way. Parts of it are already in place. So you don't want to have single family homes that front on that just because it's an 8-foot wide trail that gets plowed and it pushes snow into a driveway. We'd much prefer a development pattern that didn't have driveways on there. You could do townhomes or something like that had frontage or vehicular access to a private street in the back. And so that made a lot more sense to us. We chatted with MMS with the concern about, how does this development pattern and you can kind of see the subject property there is the draft preliminary plat. We're reviewing that. We anticipate it'll come back to you in next month. But that's just kind of a draft of what we're looking at of how things would be developed. And then obviously the Michelson development to the east adjacent to Jones Boulevard. You start to see that development. And then we just said, okay, MMS, how does this development how do you anticipate how this all connects up in the future? Knowing that they don't have any interest currently in the property in the middle, we haven't talked to this property owner, but certainly we want to have some idea of how these things would be interconnected and generally provided a street grid, which makes a lot of sense to us. So the streets kind of line up how they are. So we're generally happy with that design. But again, you'll get a chance to look at that next month. We have two findings. Again, one is related to the future land use map amendment, and the second is the various zonings as requested achieve consistency with approval standards in the zoning ordinance. And so staff recommends you accept those two listed findings and forward the request to City Council with recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Do we have an applicant presentation?
Good evening. No formal presentation. John Marner with MMS Consultants. I think Russ hit all the key points there. Again, the change is essentially being driven by they're a little more prepared to move forward with the development plan on the property. And based on the current market, the desire to match some of the RD10 that's already zoned to the north and some of the development to the west that he mentioned. And then obviously we've been working with staff to make sure that the street grid and all those types of things are thinking ahead towards potential connections to the east as well and to the south, as he mentioned, for Alexander. I'm available for any questions if you have any.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Do we have any public comment? Wonderful. Questions or comments?
Russ, refresh my memory, where is the long-term care facility that we had?
So it's you see I don't know if this will show up or not, but the purple, the larger purple on be the southwest of the subject property there.
Okay.
That's where it is. So that was recently zoned to RM21. So that's got, at least approved to the 21 units to the acre. So, and then you have the existing RM12 with the development to the north. So it made sense I think, they're requesting an RM14, which is just barely above that. So that kind of made sense to me. And then kind of you could see how the zoning line kind of curves, goes due north, and then kind of curves east, or I should say northeast. That's kind of the road of how Alexander Way kind of goes through the property and then kind of meets at the kind of towards the northeast corner of the property. As you go up north, especially west of Centennial Park, in the Watts development, the preserve is kind of, you see that portion of Alexander Way already existing.
Kind of follows the road on that sketch that
That's right.
showing before. Is there any anticipated time frame of Alexander Way going through?
It's going to be piecemeal with development. So I think the way, just because I think Alexander Way through this section is probably going to have to be developed early, just because they need different accesses to achieve the density that they want. But you've got a phase, which I think is, we have a developer that's looking to develop, but just when they're ready to develop. And then there's a parcel to the north that's still in the county. They just don't have any desire at this point to annex into the city, which is fine. But it's just going to be developed with development as it moves through.
Thanks.
Do we have any way to project like traffic counts once Alexander Way is completed, or like what that would look like?
I think once it's completed, yeah. At this point, I don't know. We'd probably be similar to what, and I don't even know what Jones Boulevard is, but nowhere near capacity.
And we're kind of looking into the planning for the future on like the width of the road and
Right now we're looking at the width of the road for a collector road being 31 feet back to curb, which is just slightly wider of a local street. But I think what's important to note is that by constructing these, what I call it alternative corridors, and I mean alternative to like Rancho Way or Jones Boulevard or Kansas, they provide relief on those corridors. Rancho Way Phase 6, going from a 2-lane rural section to a 4-lane urban section is a tremendously expensive project that we need help with grants for. Projects like this will provide relief to those corridors. And then I believe for many, many years will require us not to like 4-lane roads like Kansas or Jones or things like that, which would be really, really expensive. So that's the idea really with making these grids in these east-west, north-south roads.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions, comments?
Nope.
Not, I'd entertain a motion.
I move that the Planning Commission accept the listed findings and forward the future land map amendment and zoning map amendment to the City Council with a recommendation for approval.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Willer,
Aye.
Mickelson,
Aye.
Schmerbach,
Aye.
Yadi.
Aye. Great. Motion carries. Moving on to item number 6, a street vacation. We'll start with a staff presentation.
Okay, so this is the request of the city to vacate remnant portions of North Front Street and Dubuque Street, north of Cherry Street. And I might just ask, do you want to?
Well, yeah, you guys never get to hear from me. If you look at the very fine map, thank you, Mr. Rusnak, for the very fine map that you provided there. Way better than the piece of garbage I'm handing out. You will recognize that we're sitting in that building there on the left, and the blue area in question is where Dubuque Street used to run. And where Front Street used to run before, the Dubuque Street Improvement Project completed the realignment of these streets, making it a much safer, more and better intersection, and then allowing for the construction of the City Hall here. Now, we are in the process of cleaning up some of the lines left over there, and so those lines right now technically are still right-of-way and used as a public street, and part of the Planning Commission's duties is to offer recommendations as to whether or not right-of-way should or should not be vacated. Staff strongly recommends that the Planning Commission also recommend to the City Council that the right-of-way shown here be vacated. There will be a public hearing for this in front of the City Council, but it needs your recommendation one way or another before that can go forward, and that's scheduled for next week. So this is just cleanup, which is to allow eventually for the creation of a subdivision that is the civic campus. So where we're sitting right now is a mishmash of old parcels, and we would like to clean it up and have it look nice on a map. In order to do that, we need to do some of these things first. So that's it.
And so
We've
there
already-
are
I'm
two
sorry.
findings. Yep, sorry. There are two findings which are required by code. By ordinance, you have to find both of these things happen in order to recommend or to vacate a road. So we believe both of those are in place. So we recommend you accept those two findings and forward the request to City Council with a recommendation for approval.
And I'll just clarify one thing. What the map you're looking at is a little bit different than what was on what Ms. Russig put forward. It has, what you have is A, B, C, and D on in front of you there. A and B have already been conveyed to the neighboring property owners, and so what we're talking about here is just C and D, and that should line up with what's on your screen there. So anyway, if you have any questions, let me know. But it's the motion we'd be looking for is a motion to recommend approval of the vacation of the right-of-way to the City Council. That's it.
Thank you. Any public comment? Wonderful. Questions or comments?
Makes sense to me.
Sure does.
It's kind of hard to remember
Right.
what it was like.
I know.
But
It's kind of a blast from the past, isn't it?
Yeah.
I remember craning my neck to see if a car was coming. to the intersection.
It's a lot nicer now.
It
Yes,
is.
it is.
I do have one question. Would there be any, with getting rid of the right of way, does that change, I guess, what would be on those sections at all? Or is any?
No,
is there any-
no. It's right-of-way is held in trust for public use, and right now it's held in trust for public use as partially as a plaza and so on. But this will, the resolution or ordinance, it'll take 3 readings, invites public comment saying, no, this should never, or yes, we should. And at the end, we'll affect a transfer of that. So right now it's held as in public trust, like as any street or sidewalk is, and then otherwise it'll be conveyed as a real property interest. It'll be conveyed in fee to the neighboring property owner, which in this case is the city.
And there was a previous action to designate that plaza area as a public park. So
Makes
we
sense.
don't, with all the improvements there, we don't anticipate any of that change.
These are it's a little esoteric. I mean, we get that, but
Great. I'd entertain a motion.
Okay. Is that the right one up?
It sure is.
Because I couldn't find mine on my iPad. I move that the Planning Commission accept the listed findings and forward the request to vacate remnant portions of North Front Street and North Dubuque Street to the City Council with recommendation for approval.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Maybe a roll call vote, please.
Willer,
Aye.
Schmerbach,
Aye.
Yadi,
Aye.
Mickelson,
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay, moving on to item number 7, zoning code ordinance. We'll start with a staff presentation.
Okay, let's see here. This is an ordinance amendment to amend a couple of sections of the code, Chapter 167, 168, and 169. And these are, for the most part, related to design requirements for multifamily buildings. And then there's a change for swimming pools. Been talking quite a bit with various developers just about the required masonry. I think we saw one which was 100% masonry, and that's great. The biggest pushback I get to the currently in commercial districts, it's a 60% requirement for masonry. We do give you credit for any window glazing or glazing indoors or things like that. So you can take that credit as a one-to-one. But the biggest criticism I get from that is it just prevents some imagination with design of the building, because you're kind of stuck with the 60% masonry. And we don't go a lot into requirements for other things like breaking up a long expanse of a wall or any vertical changes or anything like that. So we're really looking at kind of just slightly reducing that requirement for masonry in commercial districts and adding more emphasis on other design requirements. So there were a couple opportunities, since I was already in the definitions, looked at irrelevant definitions like net floor area and floor area ratio, because the only place those are located are in the definition section. And that really bothers me. I think it was well intended that it would be located, that we were going to regulate floor area ratio or something like that. We just never got to it, or it got taken out at some point. So there's no reason to have a definition for it if we're not regulating in any fashion. The second part is to amend the definition of building height. We currently measure building height to the top of the coping. And I think more typical is to measure to the top of the flat roof and give you an exemption for any kind of parapets or things that conceal the flat roof. That makes sense to me, and also will be helpful if we require more of a vertical change on those parapet walls and things like that. We also don't specifically exempt any rooftop screening, which is required by code, but we should also provide for that is also exempt. If you're providing your equipment up there, we require you to screen it. We need to make sure that we're also stating in the code that that's exempt from our height regulations as well. Also tweaking the definition of private garage and masonry required, adding definitions for transparency and transparency required, because we use those terms in the zoning code. Okay, so the big one is for multifamily, and I'll tell you that from my standpoint, I am working towards more district-specific design regulations and use-specific design regulations. When I reorganized the code and put use standards, so every use in the code has its own standards, it's very easy to write design standards for those particular uses. So when we get in and say, okay, we just want to tweak the design of multifamily buildings, I can do that relatively easy. I still think some of these things are pretty difficult to write, because I think we can look at a picture and say, that looks great. But when you put pen to paper, it gets a little bit harder of what you want to achieve. But in the spirit of it, the idea is to reduce masonry 60 to 40%, just to give you the opportunity to use other materials, particularly require when you after a certain distance to have some horizontal change of the building, and then also after a certain distance to have some vertical change. I'll show a few examples of things that I think could have been designed just a little bit better. Everything in this in North Liberty is designed really well, so please bear in mind that if I show examples up here, I'm being really picky. Of just saying maybe it could have been just a little bit better. And then, currently in residential districts like multifamily, we require 25% masonry just on the elevations that face a street. Let's just go ahead and increase those and say you got to have them on all elevations, especially if we're giving you credit for glazing. It helps provide a unifying theme. I think that just makes total sense to me. That's just so. And then also requiring those same standards for these assisted living facilities. There's a bit of a question about what was required. I got into that a little bit and kind of had to say, look, I think you should provide more masonry on the Dover development, Cedarhurst, which we just talked about a few minutes ago. This would be very clear of you need 25% if you're in residential or 40% all the way around, and it won't be a question. I never want to be in a position of asking. I'd just rather say this is what the code requires. Pretty quick conversation at that point. I've always said that why do we have this 60% masonry requirement? And I said, from a regulatory standpoint, it's really easy. It's one of the most easiest things to write. It's just to say 60% masonry. You don't have to get into building articulation vertically and horizontally, but it obviously has some of its drawbacks. I will point out that this seems to be the one thing that at the state level, they're starting to dismantle and say, because it's easy also to pull it back, to say, okay, well, the state can't, and they've already done it on some things like 12 plexes, said, okay, the city can't regulate anything that's 12 plex. There are exceptions, but you can't require masonry on something that's 12 plex or less. They don't get into other design standards like building articulation and things like that. So ultimately, if that's what the state wants to do and doesn't give us a choice, we're going to have to regulate design to get good design in different ways. And I think this is moving in that direction. We still keep the masonry requirement at a lesser level, but we're also prepared for changes that might happen in the future. Okay, again, I'm being picky, but this is a nice building. This is over on Kansas in Landon Way. We talked a little bit earlier, large expanse of a building. I think this one could have benefited, particularly on this northern elevation that you see in the foreground, of maybe some horizontal change or some vertical change a little bit. Again, it's a very nice looking building, 100% masonry. But again, if you start to pull those facades up or out, I think it just adds a little bit of interest to the building. I think a little bit better as you go down on the southern elevation there, it starts to pull a little bit. This is Penn Street Place. This is a very nice looking building, a very high amount of masonry. And I sometimes wonder, like, did the requirement of masonry kind of, although it looks nice, perhaps they could have used some other building materials to kind of add a little bit more visual interest. Does a good job of some horizontal changes, some vertical changes, probably, again, I'm being really picky here. Maybe in the middle or something could have had another vertical change or something like that. Would have been nice. This is on Yarrow Way, some of the newer 12 plexes that went there. I actually think they did a pretty good job here. You see a lot of building articulation, pushing and pulling, and even with kind of a hip and gable roof or something that creates some visual interest on there. So I think they did a really good job on this one. But, these are the types of things that I'd want to enforce with design, encourage with design. But so those are kind of the goals that I'm trying to get at here. And then the third one, realize that we don't allow swimming pools in a side yard. I'm not a big fan of doing this, but ran into a citizen who had their entire backyard was an easement. And then I wonder, why didn't we allow swimming pools in the side yard? What I thought would make sense to do is we allow a garage in the side yard as long as you meet the setback for the main building. So like, if you have RS4, which is 10-foot setback on the side, you'd have to maintain that same setback. And I thought that made a lot of sense to me and provided a little bit of flexibility and kept somebody out of providing, going for a variance or something like that. So no objections to this request. Let's see, the proposed amendment would achieve consistency with standards in the zoning code for text amendments. And so staff recommends you accept that listed finding and forward the request to City Council with a recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, do we have any public comment? Great.
And I would like to thank Dave. Dave's our resident architect, so sometimes I ask Dave, Dave, am I going in the right direction here? And Dave gives me, little comments. Which
Am I allowed to vote on this?
Yeah, please do.
How did he mention my name?
Any questions or comments?
On page, I think 38, in kind of the red area, like in the changes that you're making, it says that it's like it was line 3, but would be changed to line 2. It says in residential, I guess it's missing the 60%. Is that 25% supposed to be, say 60%?
On which one?
40%.
3 to 2.
Does anyone else see that?
It's because it's residential, maybe?
All building elevations is 25 in residential districts.
So, okay, so what happens is the 60% masonry is in a different section of our code. It's in a general section. It's in 169.10. And in that general, and that's what I'm trying to move away from. It's in a general section that says all buildings in commercial districts need to be 60% masonry. And so that's why I say notwithstanding the masonry requirements in 169.1. Good question.
So yeah, so you're moving it from the general section to this by adding that on the end.
Yep.
And 40% in commercial districts.
We're basically saying ignore that masonry requirement and we're gonna go with this requirement.
Okay. That
Good
makes
question.
sense.
Great question.
I also appreciated your presentation because that helped me understand a little bit more kind of why we would do this. My initial thought when reading like moving 60% down to 40% is kind of worrying about unintended like design things that could happen. And my brain kind of went to like the cafe standards legislation where they like tried to get better gas mileage in vehicles by, tying that to vehicle size and stuff. And like, great idea. Like we want to get better mileage for a ton of reasons. But instead we got these giant trucks where the bumper is like at eye level with me and I'm 6 foot, and like it unintended consequences, these bigger and bigger vehicles. And like, so kind of looking at, are we opening a door to like some unintended like consequences in design? Because, like you stated, the buildings in North Liberty are really well designed overall, and you're being picky, but overall, like really well designed. And part of that is because of the current 60% requirement. So,
Yeah, maybe. And I'd love to say I'm perfect, and I didn't go, man. I didn't
I'll
think
say it.
about
He's
that.
perfect. Part of what we do for code review is before things come to you and to the council. I don't know if I can jump
Please.
in. Is to catastrophize, right?
Yeah.
And he gives me an idea, and I see if I can figure out how to break it or make things terrible. But there are some things we catch, right? One was changing there's an exemption for screening for equipment on the roof, but screening is exempt from a height requirement. But why don't we change that to necessary screening being exempt from the height requirement? Because otherwise, why not have a 40-foot tall thing and call it screening, right? So those are the sort of little things you want to try to identify and carve out, and we are gonna miss things though. And the nice thing is that we have this process to course correct as we go along. No one up here will promise that it's going to be perfect. It has been looked at, and if you guys come up with a great idea that you think or something we've missed, please say it now. And where we got lots of time to amend it, or recommend against it if you don't like the idea. But that is part of our internal review.
Yeah, and I think historically, I don't know that there's been a lot of building materials that the idea behind masonry is its permanence, and I don't know that there's been a lot of alternative materials that you'd say, okay, that looks great, because it's normally like, okay, masonry or siding, and it's now we're starting to see a lot of materials come out that I think, innovation has kind of created these different things, which I think part of interest in a building is varying materials to add interest. So it's just not masonry. And I think certainly there's masonry, if somebody does masonry well and does different colors of masonry and changes some things, but just a blank wall of just 60% masonry in the same color is like, it's pretty boring. You could have done a better job.
Yeah.
So the idea is, I think, and lean on the architects who are the designers and they want to design something well, of just put some of these minimum requirements in place, like some vertical and horizontal change that they say, okay, if this is a requirement, then I'm going to go in this direction and use this as a material and make the building look nice. Because I'm every architect I work with doesn't want to put something out there that looks bad. But I think this gives people an opportunity to be a little bit more creative instead of just stuck in that, masonry requirement.
yeah.
I would have to agree as somebody who designs these residential buildings. changing the requirements to minimizing a little bit can really help open up the materials and the placements that you can use.
Yeah, and I think, the next frontier really is kind of looking at some residential. I mean, that's a big one. I don't know if I'll get to it this year, but, trying to break up some of the monotony you see on a block. I just think there's some subtle design things that you can do. You can start to look at roof forms, just a couple of things that make things look a little different. And that's generally the direction I want to go, is just to, I don't think we're going to change the development pattern of generally being a suburban type development. We'll get good quality development. But I think, you could do some tweaks to make people think, oh, wow, that looks really nice. And that's what we're going for.
So it sounds like kind of some of the other stuff you hope to change or add into the code will kind of protect against any negatives that could come out of that.
Yeah, and in particular, I mean, where you live, Zach, is Old Town. I think, vision for the Old Town is really to kind of create something that supports and is compatible with the, I call it historical architecture that you have.
Yeah.
I think you see some bad examples in there just because we didn't have those tools of front-loaded garages that just don't make sense in those neighborhoods. And so you really got to get to look at specific zonings of, say, in this area, we want this. In this area, this is okay.
If you were to build a new build home, like in an empty lot there, and try and make it fit in with the current homes there and the architectural kind of theme of the neighborhood, it would be really hard with that stone requirement.
Yeah. So you want to
homes are only.
You're right. Yeah. In those, and particularly like in areas like along Cherry Street, if we're looking at kind of the Cherry Street reinvestment district, I think along those areas, like in an older, again, it goes back to scale. And so if you have a smaller scale commercial building, I don't think you need to have a masonry requirement. In fact, it looks a little weird. Same with some of your older homes. It would just look weird to stick, masonry on there. And so that's also a vision, is kind of look at that, what I call a neighborhood commercial district, and doing away with masonry requirements. Certainly if you had a 2-story masonry building, and there's many lovely examples of historic masonry buildings that look great, but I don't know that you need them in something that's smaller scale.
And kind of thinking into the future, and like, are you able to do neighborhood themes, or like kind of, requirements based on the neighborhood that they're in, I guess?
Yep.
Yeah. Cool.
No problem.
All right. Well, that all sounds good.
Sounds like we got a volunteer here for.
Yeah.
I'll chime in. On page 20 that you asked for, that you mentioned, that particular section says, notwithstanding thus and such, but to the maximum extent permitted by Iowa Code 414IH. That code section is where the state legislature has clawed back the ability of political subdivisions like cities and counties to govern what the cladding is on residential uses that are 12 units or smaller, so that we have no say on what goes on a house on Stewart Street, right? Unless it has 13 units or more, right? That's to give you a sense.
But we could, perfectly legal to say, can't have a garage facing the front street. It's got to face a side or something like that.
You might need some articulation, horizontal or vertical interest, stuff like that. So those tools are still available, and that's, I think, what this code amendment really is focusing on, is using the tools that are available to us.
Awesome.
Great discussion. Any other questions or comments?
Nope.
Wonderful. I'd entertain a motion.
Okay, I'll do that. I move that the Planning Commission accept the listed findings and forward the ordinance amendment to the City Council with a recommendation for approval.
Great, thank you. Do we have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Schmerbach,
Aye.
Yadi,
Aye.
Willer,
Aye.
Mickelson.
Aye.
Motion carries. Great, moving on to item number 8, approval of the previous minutes. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Great, do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great, previous minutes approved. Item number 9, planning updates.
Not a lot. We actually are pretty light next month, so surprisingly. A lot of things in the works. We're reviewing construction plans for Sunset Prairie, all the larger Watts development, so we're going through that now. So I think we anticipate the preliminary plat for the rezoning that we saw tonight coming back, but generally speaking, pretty light. But take a deep breath. I'm sure it'll pick up here.
Great. Well, if there's nothing else, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
And a second?
I'll second that motion.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. Meeting adjourned.